Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. I'm so glad you're here. Well, the day has finally arrived. It's Ashley's birthday and I managed to finish the Friends project with a couple of days to spare. I took a picture of the birthday girl and I'll include it at the back of the video, but I'm also going to use it as the thumbnail in case you can't wait. I wanted to let you know that I'm going to be away for a couple of weeks on vacation, but when I get back, we're finally going to get started on building the dream house. So I really hope that you come back for that. In the meantime, enjoy the finale of the Friends apartment build. I'm starting today with the cabinet that the TV sat on. Now, this cabinet was kind of an odd shape in that the front of it was kind of at different levels. There were some portions of this cabinet that were set back farther than other portions. And so my original thought was I was going to build 4 separate little boxes and put them together. But in the end, I decided that I'll just do one larger rectangle box and then I'll add those sections that came out farther from the others just by adding additional wood. The piece lying flat on my desk is the back of the cabinet, and so I'm just going to start by gluing on the bottom piece. Next, I'm going to add the 2 side pieces. So I'm just adding glue on 2 sides, one long and one short. And this piece is going to sit on top of the back and in that L shape that's created by the 2 pieces I've already put together. You can see where I've left a small space at the bottom of those 2 sides so that I have enough room for the width of the wood for the top piece. And then of course I'll add the front of the cabinet on to close up the box. While the box is drying, I'm going to create the top of this cabinet. So the top of the cabinet is actually quite thick and it's rounded on the front. So I'm going to do some sanding on these pieces. On one of them, I'm just going to take off that sharp corner, but on the other section, or the very top section, I'm going to round that off as much as I can. When I glue the 2 pieces together, it's important that I get glue across the entire surface of the piece of wood so that nothing lifts in the drying process. It's important to either clamp or weight these pieces down as they dry so that they don't warp. I've given both of those pieces plenty of time to dry, and now I'm just going to attach the top piece onto the box. It's important that the back of the top is nice and flush with both sides as well as the back of the cabinet. You can see that the front edge of the top sticks out quite a ways. I need that room so that I can build up the sections of this cabinet that sit forward from the rest. The front of the cabinet looks like it's in 4 sections. And on either side, there's these tall cupboard door looking pieces. And on top of the cupboard door was what looks like this rounded, almost scroll-like piece of wood. I cut a couple of pieces off of a barbecue skewer to create that rounded piece. And then this section of wood here will be the actual cupboard door. The front of the cabinet had this beautiful wood grain pattern to it, and I'm going to try and recreate that using some very thin veneer. I've sectioned off the door fronts into 4 separate pieces, and I'm going to cut my veneer so that the grain of the wood goes off in different directions. Rather than try to explain that further, I'm just going to show you a picture of the actual cabinet. If I'm being honest, it was a pretty slow and tedious process. was a lot of cutting of angles and then trying to make sure that the piece was the right size and then recutting it because the wood grain was going the wrong way. But I'm glad I persevered because when it was finally done, I loved the effect that it made. When I was test fitting the cupboard doors, I found that these little round dowels weren't quite high enough. So I'm going to add this tiny little piece of wood underneath so that that wood scroll sits up a little bit higher. With those in place, I can now add the doors on underneath the round dowels. The middle of the cabinet was in two sections. The bottom section was just one large drawer, and I'm going to do that part next. I've cut the drawer front from the same size of wood as I did the two side cupboards. And I'm going to use the same method of applying that veneer finish to get the wood grain effect that I'm looking for. There was a little piece of wood trim on the top and bottom of that drawer, so I want to add that in as well. On either side of the cabinet, under the cupboard doors, there were these doubled up rounded feet. Now on the actual cabinet, there was 3 sets on either side. Given the scale of this little piece of furniture, I was really struggling to make 3 that were small enough to fit across there. So I've cheated a little bit, and I'm just going to put 1 on each side. I also realized in the editing process that I lost the footage of this little decorative piece in the middle. I apologize for that. I don't know if I accidentally deleted it or maybe I forgot to film it at all, but it's just a very thin 1.5 millimeter piece of wood that I've just kind of shaped and glued onto the bottom. Now I've added the wood grain up into the top section of the middle there. I just didn't put that extra piece of wood, so now it is set back from the rest of the 3 pieces like it shows in the picture. I'm going to paint it with some watered down reddish brown paint and hopefully get the same color as the actual cabinet. I carved a little groove in the upper middle section. The reference picture shows that there's actually 2 drawers there, even though the wood grain is continuous. So by putting that little groove, I'm hoping that I've shown that it's 2 separate pieces. I've cut some handles out of some scrap wood and I've just painted them with an antique gold color. And I'm just going to glue those onto the front of the cabinet. I'm going to add a coat of polish just to brighten it up and give it some shine, but I'm pretty happy with how this little cabinet turned out. To make the TV for the top of the cabinet, I'm just going to use a couple of pieces of foam board. So this will be the back piece, and you can see I've drawn some lines in here. I'm going to cut this back at an angle because I don't think that the back of the TV would have been a square. That line is drawn at about 4 millimeters from the end. So I'm going to cut from that line to the corner of the back of that piece of foam board. I've done that to both sides, and so this is what it will look like when it's glued together. For the top section, you can see I've drawn a line here on the side. That's just so that I have room for the controls. And then I've drawn the shape of the screen itself. And I'm just using my knife here just to cut through the top layer of paper and down maybe a millimeter into the foam board. And now I'm just going to peel up and remove that top layer of paper. Then I'm just taking my cuticle stick and I'm pushing gently around the outside of the screen. That'll give it that rounded look. Now if you don't have a cuticle stick, that's fine. A small screwdriver or anything with a flat edge will do the trick. I'll glue the two pieces together just with some quick drying tacky glue, but any kind of glue will work. Once the glue was dry, I went around with an emery board and just smoothed out all of the edges. I don't want the line where the two pieces are joined together to show, so I'm going to use some spackling to smooth out all the way around the outside, but it also is going to smooth out a little bit of the foam itself. Now I know there's lots of different tools you can use to apply this stuff. I just find my fingers are the easiest and I get the smoothest finish. Once the spackling is dried, another quick sand and we'll be ready for paint. I painted the inside screen a gray color instead of black because I do want it to stand out and make it obvious that it is an actual TV, but the rest of the TV itself is going to be painted black. I'm covering the whole piece with some Mod Podge. This will do two things. One, it'll give it a nice shine, and second of all, it'll protect the paint from chipping. Once that had dried, I added 3 little blanks from a diamond art kit to act as my controls. Let's see how it looks on the cabinet. The third thing that I want to show you is the speaker that sat to the right of the cabinet. So this was a pretty basic shape. It was just a rectangle box, but it did have these speakers in the front. I'm using foam board for the box, and then I have a couple of different sizes of brads that I'm going to use for the speaker itself. I've made a little indentation with the back of the brad. Now I'm just going to take my X-Acto knife and cut out that circle so that I can push that brad into the front of the speaker. I did the same thing for the smaller brad, which sat just above that larger one. The front of the speaker had a wood grained effect, so I'm trying to recreate that just using a couple of different colors of paint. I started with the darker color, and once it had dried, I dry brushed on a little bit lighter shade. Next, I added a wood frame all the way around the speaker. I just did the 4 sides since you won't see the back anyway. Then I just went in with some brown paint and painted the whole outside of that structure. After the painting was done, I could go ahead and glue in those brads and finish the speaker. A couple other accessories that I've made to finish off the project. I wanted something for the center of the coffee table. So I found this little tiny dish in my collection. I painted it with some gold rub and buff, and I'm going to fill it with caviar beads and make it into a candy dish. I have quite a few colors of these caviar beads, so I'm just going to mix up a few colors and give it some variety. I started with some glue in the bottom, added the different colored beads, and now I'm just adding a top layer of podge, which, when it dries clear, will hold all of the beads in place and give it a little bit of a shine. I also made a couple of houseplants. So I just took caps off of different things that I have in my junk drawer, and then I took some embroidery floss and wrapped it around the outside. The leaves for the plant itself are extras from a kit I did last year. I placed those accessories in and around the TV cabinet, and of course the very last thing that I did was hang the infamous picture up on the wall. And here we are, the apartment in its entirety. I want to once again send a special thank you to Fatima for providing all of those extra special pieces that really made this project complete. I cannot thank you enough for your kindness and your generosity. And to all my viewers, thank you so much for joining me on this journey. I know Ashley is going to love it. Until next time, bye for now.